Albert Bandura, 1925 to 2021. Albert Bandura was born in Canada in a town so small that his high school had only 20 students and 2 teachers. His parents were immigrants from Poland who had little formal education, but who placed a high value on formal education for their son. "You have a choice," his mother told him. "You can work in the field and get drunk in the beer parlor, or you might get an education." Bandura decided on an education. After he graduated from high school, he worked with construction crews in the Yukon Territory, filling potholes in the Alaska Highway. Finding himself in the midst of a curious collection of characters, most of whom had fled creditors, alimony, and probation officers, Bandura quickly developed a keen appreciation for the psychopathology of everyday life, which seemed to blossom in the austere tundra. Bandura enrolled at the University of British Columbia in Vancouver, where, quite by accident, he discovered what he wanted to do with his life. He said, quote, "I was in a carpool with pre-meds and engineers who enrolled in classes at an unmercifully early hour. So while waiting for my English class, I flipped through a course catalog that happened to have been left on a table in the library. I noticed an introductory psychology course that would be an early time filler. I enrolled in the course and found my future profession." End quote. That was Bandura in 2007. Thus, he took his first course in psychology only because it was offered at a convenient time, but he found the topic fascinating. He earned a PhD from the University of Iowa in 1952 and went from there to a distinguished and highly productive career at Stanford University. Bandura's social cognitive theory is a less extreme form of behaviorism than B.F. Skinner's, and it reflects the spirit of its times and the impact of psychology's renewed interest in cognitive factors, given their most recent zeitgeist. Bandura's viewpoint remained a behaviorist. However, his research focus was to observe the behavior of human subjects in interaction. He did not use introspection, and he emphasized the importance of rewards or reinforcements in acquiring and modifying behavior, much like B.F. Skinner. Bandura's approach is a social learning theory because it studies behavior as it is formed and modified in social situations. Therefore, it is called neo-behaviorism or social behaviorism, because Bandura criticized Skinner for using only individual subjects, mostly rats and pigeons, instead of human subjects interacting with one another. He pointed out that few people live in social isolation and that psychologists cannot expect research findings that ignore social interactions to be relevant to the modern world. In addition to being a behavioral theory, Bandura's system is cognitive. He stressed the influence on external reinforcement schedules of such thought processes as beliefs, expectations, and instructions. In Bandura's view, behavioral responses are not automatically triggered in humans by external stimuli, as with a machine or a robot. Instead, reactions to stimuli are self-activated, initiated by the person. When an external reinforcer alters the behavior, it does so because the person is consciously aware of the response that is being reinforced and anticipates receiving the same reinforcer for behaving in the same way the next time the situation occurs. Although Bandura agreed with Skinner that human behavior can be changed through reinforcement, he also suggested and demonstrated empirically that individuals can learn virtually all kinds of behavior without experiencing reinforcement directly. We do not always have to be reinforced ourselves to learn something. We can also learn through what Bandura called vicarious reinforcement, by observing how other people behave and seeing the consequences of their behavior. Again, vicarious reinforcement is Bandura's notion that learning can occur by observing the behavior of other people and the consequences of their behavior, rather than by always experiencing reinforcement personally ourselves. This ability to learn by example and vicarious reinforcement assumes that we have the capacity to anticipate and appreciate consequences we observe in others, even though we have not experienced them ourselves. We can regulate our own behavior by visualizing the consequences of a particular behavior we have not personally experienced and then making a conscious decision to behave or not behave similarly. Bandura suggests that there is not a direct link between stimulus and response or between behavior and reinforcement, as B.F. Skinner had noted. Instead, a mediating mechanism is interposed between stimulus and response, and that mechanism is the person's cognitive processes. Again, just to recapitulate, the stimulus response is also known as the SR. So, cognitive processes came to play a powerful role in Bandura's social cognitive theory, clearly distinguishing it from B.F. Skinner's approach. To Bandura, it is not the actual reinforcement schedule that is effective in changing a person's behavior, but rather what the person thinks that schedule is. Okay, rather than learning by experiencing reinforcement directly, we learn through modeling, which involves observing other people and patterns or patterning our behavior on their behavior. For Skinner, whoever controls the reinforcers controls behavior. For Bandura, whoever controls society's models controls behavior. And Bandura and many others have conducted extensive research on the characteristics of the models that influence human behavior. We are much more likely to model our behavior after a person of the same sex and age, our peers, and those who have solved problems that are similar to our own. We also tend to be impressed by models high in status and prestige. The type of behavior involved also affects the extent of our imitation. Simple behaviors are more likely to be imitated than highly complex behaviors. Hostile and aggressive behaviors tend to be strongly imitated, especially by young children. Thus, what we see in real life or in the media can often determine our behavior. Research conducted in a number of countries around the entire globe has consistently found that children who watch a great deal of violence on television and in movies, or who spend time playing action-packed video games, display far more violent and aggressive behavior as adolescents and young adults than do children who are exposed to less violence. Studies have also found that teenagers and young adults who listen frequently to rap music tend to become more hostile and sexually aggressive than those who listen to less of this type of music. However, I do want to clarify here, on a personal note, that this, just because they have a higher probability of committing more violence as an adult, doesn't necessarily mean that they will. Okay, with that being said, the findings of the effects of the exposure to violence in the media or in person are so strong that the Surgeon General of the United States, as well as the National Institute of Mental Health, the APA, the American Medical Association, and the American Psychiatric Association all agree that exposure to violence is a significant risk factor in producing violence in those who witness it. Again, other research has found that playing street racing games leads to reckless driving, and that simply watching video images of smoking, drinking, and having unprotected sex leads to a higher willingness to engage in all sorts of risky behaviors. It has also been found that observing violence at school, at home, or in one's neighborhood is highly likely to lead to violent and aggressive behavior. Bandura in 1982 conducted considerable research on what he called self-efficacy, described as our sense of self-esteem or self-worth, and that our feeling of adequacy, efficiency, and competence in dealing with problems. Again, self-efficacy is one's sense of self-esteem and competence in dealing with life's problems. His work has shown that people who have a great deal of self-efficacy believe that they are capable of coping with the diverse events in their lives. They expect to be able to overcome obstacles. They seek challenges. They persevere. They maintain a high level of confidence in their ability to succeed, to exert control over their lives. One researcher described self-efficacy simply as, quote, the power of believing you can, adding that believing that you can accomplish what you want to accomplish is one of the most important ingredients in the recipe for success, end quote. People in low self-efficacy feel helpless, even hopeless, about coping and think they have little chance to affect the situations they confront. When they encounter problems, they are likely to give up if their initial attempts at solutions fail. They believe nothing they can do will make a difference and that they have little or no control over their fate. Bandura's research has shown that our belief in our level of self-efficacy influences many aspects of our lives. For example, people higher in self-efficacy tend to earn better grades, consider more career possibilities, have greater job success, higher personal goals, and enjoy better physical and mental health than people in lower self efficacy. In general, men who have been found to be higher than women in self efficacy. Both men and women, for both men and women, self efficacy seems to peak in middle age and it declines after age 60. So it seems obviously that a high degree of self efficacy will lead to positive effects in many aspects of life. For example, people high in self efficacy feel better and healthier and more or less bothered by stress, more tolerant of physical pain, likely to recover more quickly from illness or surgery than people low in self efficacy. Self efficacy also affects classroom and job performance. For example, employees high in self efficacy have been found to be more satisfied with their work, committed to their organization, more motivated to perform well on the job, and in training programs that are employees low in self-efficacy. Also, people high in social self-efficacy feel confident about their ability to initiate social contact and develop new friendships. They score high on measures of emotional well-being and are less likely to become addicted to internet use than are those who score low in social self-efficacy. A long-term study has recently showed that classroom teachers in Germany found that those who were high in self-efficacy were rated by their students as being more effective teachers than those low in self-efficacy. But also those whose students rated them high in quality of classroom instruction subsequently developed higher levels of self-efficacy. So the positive feedback from their students' ratings made them feel even surer of themselves. Bandura's research showed that groups develop collective efficacy levels that influence their performance of various tasks. Studies on such diverse groups as sports teams, corporate departments, military outfits, urban neighborhoods, political action coalitions found that the stronger the perceived collective efficacy, the higher the group's aspirations and motivational investment in their undertakings, the stronger their staying power in the face of impediments and setbacks, the higher their morale and resilience to stressors, and the greater their performance accomplishments. A study of employees of a large financial organization in Italy found that those high in collective efficacy were more committed to their company than those low in self-efficacy. And I just want to reiterate here that this goes under the study in psychology of industrial psychology. Bandura's purpose in developing a social cognitive approach to behaviorism was to change or modify those behaviors society considers abnormal or undesirable. He reasoned that if all behaviors are learned by observing other people and by modeling our behavior on theirs, then undesirable behaviors can be altered or relearned in the same way. Like Skinner, Bandura focused on externals, on the behavior itself, and not on any presumed internal conscious or unconscious conflict. To Bandura, treating the symptom means treating the disorder, because symptom and disorder are the same. So modeling techniques are used to change behavior by having subjects observe a model in a situation that usually causes them anxiety. For example, children who are afraid of dogs watch a child their age approach and touch a dog. Observing from a safe distance, the fearful children see the model take progressively closer and bolder movements toward the dog. The model pets the dog through the bars of a playpen and then enters the playpen with the dog. As a result of this observational learning situation, the children's fear of dogs can be reduced. In a variation of this technique, subjects watch models play with the feared object, such as a snake, and then the subjects themselves make progressively closer movements toward the object until they are actually able to handle it. Bandura's form of behavior therapy is widely used in clinical, business, and classroom situations and has been supported by hundreds of experimental studies. It has been effective in eliminating phobias about snakes, closed spaces, open spaces, and heights. It has also been useful in treating obsessive-compulsive disorders, sexual dysfunctions, and some forms of anxiety, and it can be used to enhance self-efficacy. It has also been shown to reduce test-taking anxiety among college students. Bandura's work has been adapted for media programs designed to present models for appropriate behavior to deal with social and national problems in developing countries. The behaviors targeted by modeling techniques include preventing unwanted pregnancies, controlling the spread of AIDS, promoting literacy, raising the status of women, and adopting family planning strategies. These mass media programs rely on fictional characters who act as models for listeners and viewers to emulate in changing their behavior. Research reports significant increases in desirable outcomes or behaviors such as safe sex practices, family planning, and enhancing the status of women. So, to comment on Bandura, and as you would expect, traditional behaviorists criticized Bandura's social cognitive behaviorism, arguing that cognitive processes such as belief and anticipation can have no causal effect on behavior. Bandura responded by saying that, quote, "It is amusing to see radical behaviorists who contend that thoughts have no causal influence, devoting considerable time to speeches, articles, and books in an effort to convert people's beliefs to their way of thinking," end quote. Social cognitive theory has been widely accepted in psychology as an effective way to study behavior in the laboratory and to modify it in clinical setting and the real world. In addition, Bandura's contributions have been widely recognized by his peers. He was president of the APA in 1974, and in 1980 he received the APA's Distinguished Scientific Contribution Award. In 2004, he received the APA's Outstanding Contribution to Psychology Award. And in 2006, he was the recipient of the American Psychological Foundation's Gold Medal Award for Life Achievement in the Science of Psychology. Bandura's theory and the modeling therapy derived from it fit the functional, practical cast of American psychology. His approach is objective and amenable to precise laboratory methods. It is responsive to the current intellectual climate that focuses on internal cognitive variables and is applicable to real-world issues. Julian Rotter, 1916 to 2014. Julian Rotter grew up in Brooklyn, New York. The family lived comfortably until his father lost his business at the beginning of the Great Depression in 1929. This unfortunate change in economic circumstances was a turning point for the 13-year-old. Rotter wrote, quote, "It began in me a lifelong concern with social injustice and provided me with a powerful lesson on how personality and behavior were affected by situational conditions." That is a quote that he wrote in 1993. During high school, he discovered books on psychoanalysis by Sigmund Freud and Alfred Adler. As a game, he started interpreting the dreams of his friends and decided he wanted to become a psychologist. Disappointed to learn that there were very few jobs for psychologists at the time, Rotter chose to major in chemistry instead at Brooklyn College. Once there, however, he happened to meet Adler and switched to psychology again, even though he knew it was impractical. He hoped to pursue an academic career, but prejudice against Jews thwarted that goal. At Brooklyn College and again in graduate school, Rotter said that I had been warned that Jews simply could not get academic jobs, regardless of their credentials. The warnings seemed justified. After Rotter received his PhD from Indiana University in 1941, he accepted a job at the State Mental Hospital in Connecticut. He served as a psychologist with the United States Army during World War II, taught at Ohio State University until 1963, and moved to the University of Connecticut. In 1988, he received the APA's Distinguished Scientific Contribution Award. Rotter developed a cognitive form of behaviorism, which, like Bandura's, includes reference to internal subjective experiences. Thus, his behaviorism, like Bandura's, is less radical than B.F. Skinner's. He criticized Skinner for studying individual subjects in isolation, arguing that we learn behavior primarily through social experiences. Rotter's laboratory research was rigorous and well-controlled, and he studied only human subjects in a social interaction. Rotter emphasized cognitive processes to a greater extent than Bandura. Rotter believed that we perceive ourselves as conscious beings capable of influencing the experiences that affect our lives. Our behavior is determined by external stimuli and by the reinforcement they provide. But the relative influence of these two factors is mediated by our cognitive processes. In 1982, he delineated the following four principles that govern behavioral outcomes. The first is that we form subjective expectations of the outcomes or results of our behavior in terms of the amount and kind of reinforcement likely to follow it. Second is that we estimate the likelihood that behaving in a certain way leads to a specific reinforcement and adjust our behavior accordingly. Third is that we place different values on different reinforcers and assess their relative worth for different situations. And fourth, because each of us functions in a psychological environment that is unique to us as individuals, the same reinforcement can have different values for different people. Thus, to Rotter, our subjective expectations and values, which are internal cognitive states, determine the effects that different external experiences will have on us. Before I get to the locus of control, the internal locus of control and the external locus of control, I want to emphasize, since the word values was used, basically our worldview, which we have in each individual cultures and societies, will ultimately impact our beliefs. Our belief systems will impact our values, and our values will manifest themselves in our actions. So, Roger focused considerably on research about beliefs, about the source of our reinforcers. Some people believe reinforcement depends on their own behavior. These people are said to have an internal locus of control. Other people believe reinforcement depends on outside forces, such as fate, luck, or the actions of other people. They are said to have an external locus of control. The internal locus of control is the belief that reinforcement depends on one's own behavior. The external locus of control is the belief that reinforcement depends on outside forces. Obviously, these perceptions about the source of control exert different influences on behavior. To people with an external locus of control, their own abilities and actions make little difference in the reinforcers they receive. Convinced they are powerless with respect to outside forces, they make minimal attempts to change or improve their situation. But people with an internal locus of control expect to be in charge of their lives and behave accordingly. There's a source here that I want to read from. It's from the Journal of Psychological Monographs by J.B. Rotter, from his Generalized Expectancies for Internal versus External Control of Reinforcement. It's a sample of items from the IE scale. There are 6 items. The first item says that many of the unhappy things in people's lives are partly due to bad luck. People's misfortunes result from the mistakes they make. The second is that one of the major reasons why we have wars is because people do not take enough interest in politics. There will always be wars, no matter how hard people try to prevent them. Third is that in the long run, people get the respect they deserve in this world. Unfortunately, an individual's worth often passes unrecognized, no matter how hard he or she tries. Fourth is that the idea that teachers are unfair to students is nonsense. Most students don't realize the extent to which their grades are influenced by accidental happenings. Fifth is that without the right breaks, one cannot be an effective leader. Capable people who fail to become leaders have not taken advantage of their opportunities. And sixth is that no matter how hard you try, some people just don't like you. People who can't get others to like them don't understand how to get along with others. So Rotter's research has shown that people with an internal locus of control tend to be physically and mentally healthier than those with an external locus of control. In general, internals have lower blood pressure, have fewer heart attacks, have less anxiety and depression, and are better able to cope with stress. They receive better grades in school and believe they have greater freedom of choice. They are more popular and socially skilled and rank higher in self-esteem. In addition, Rotter's work suggests that locus of control is learned in childhood from the behavior of parents or caregivers. Parents of adults who have an internal locus of control tend to be supportive, generous with praise for achievement, which is also known as positive reinforcement, can tend to be consistent in their discipline and not authoritarian in their attitudes. Rotter developed a test to measure locus of control. The test consists of 23 forced choice alternatives. Subjects select the one in each pair that best describes their beliefs. And of course, we've gone over 6 of those already. So we saw that Skinner's accidental discovery of reinforcement schedules was the result of expedience, not of wanting to spend the weekend in the lab making food pellets for his rats, because at that time, remember, they didn't have a machine or a factory that made food pellets, so they had to make it by hand. But anyway, we note that science does not always advance in the rational, systematic fashion described in many textbooks. Random or accidental factors intrude to shape the development of a field of study. For Rotter's concept of locus of control, which he considered his most significant discovery, the impetus was a chance remark made by a colleague. Rotter was conducting an experiment in which subjects working with sets of cards were instructed to guess whether the reverse side of the cards showed a square or a circle. They were told that they were being rated on their powers of extrasensory perception, or ESP. After they had finished with one set of cards, they were asked to estimate how successful they believed they would be with the second set of cards. Some subjects reported they would do worse because they thought that their successful guesses on the first trial were simply a matter of luck. Other subjects said they would do better because they believed that their successful guesses the first time were based on their extrasensory perception skills, which they expected would improve with practice. At the time Rotter was conducting this research, he was supervising the clinical training of E. Jerry Fairs, who spoke to Rotter about a patient who was upset about his lack of social life. At Fairs' urging, the man went to a party and danced with several women, but even with that apparent success, his outlook did not change. He told Fairs that he had just been lucky. It would never happen again. When Rotter heard the story, he realized that, quote, there were always some subjects in our experiments whose expectancies, like this patient's, never went up even after successes. My graduate students and I had run various experiments in which we rigged the volunteers' success or failure. Some volunteers, whether we told them they were right or wrong most of the time, didn't change their expectations that they'd get most of them wrong on the next set. Others, whatever we told them, thought they'd do better the next time. At that point, I put together two sides of my work. As practitioner and as scientist, and I hypothesized that some people feel that what happens to them is governed by external forces of one kind or another, while others feel that what happens to them is governed largely by their own efforts and skills. So, we are left to wonder whether Rotter would have developed the idea of locus of control if Fairs' patients had changed his outlook about his own popularity after going to the dance. So, Rotter's social learning theory has attracted many followers who are primarily experimentally oriented and who agree on the importance of cognitive variables in influencing behavior. His research is as rigorous and controlled as the subject matter allows, and he defined his concepts with the precision that makes them amenable to experimental testing. A large number of research studies, particularly on internal-external locus of control, support his approach. Rotter claimed that locus of control was one of the most studied variables in psychology and the other social sciences. As you have probably suspected, there is some similarity between locus of control and Bandura's concept of self-efficacy. A large-scale study of college students and of employees of a pharmaceutical company found a strong relationship between the two concepts. Both locus of control and self-efficacy deal with our beliefs about how much control we have over events in our lives and our ability to cope with them. One major difference is that locus of control can be generalized over many different situations, while self-efficacy seems to be related to more specific situations. Both concepts have been thoroughly researched and are considered major contributions of the social cognitive behavioristic approach. Although the cognitive challenge to behaviorism from within succeeded in modifying the behaviorist movement we have followed from Watson through Skinner, it is important to remember that Bandura, Rotter, and other neo-neurobehaviorists who support the cognitive approach still consider themselves behaviorists. We may call them methodological behaviorists because they invoke internal cognitive processes as part of psychology's subject matter. Whether radical behaviorists believe psychology must study only overt behavior and environmental stimuli, not any presumed internal states. Watson and Skinner were radical behaviorists. Clark, Hull, Tolman, and Bandura and Rotter can be classified as methodological behaviorists. The dominance of Skinner's brand of behaviorism peaked in the 1980s and declined after Skinner's death in 1990. Even the famous Harvard Pigeon Laboratory, begun by Skinner in 1948, was closed in 1998. Skinner conceded before his death that his form of behaviorism was losing ground and that the impact of the cognitive approach was growing. Other scholars agreed, noting that, quote, fewer scholars at major universities now call themselves behaviorists in the traditional sense. In fact, behaviorism is often referred to in the past tense, end quote. The behaviorism that remains vital in contemporary psychology, especially within applied psychology in the form of behavioral analysis, is a different behaviorism from that which flourished in the decades between Watson's 1913 manifesto and Skinner's death in 1990. As with all evolutionary movements in science and nature, species will continue to evolve. In that sense, behaviorism survives in the spirit of its founders' intent, which was to develop a technology that would be used to change behavior for the better.